click subscribe and hit that bell notification. Okay, we are in 2 Samuel chapter 2, the path of destiny. Path of destiny. Quick synopsis. So where we are in 2 Samuel, King Saul has been killed in battle. Chapter 1 of 2 Samuel, David finds out. He kills the messenger who came to him because the messenger claimed to have killed Saul. And he's like, were you not afraid to kill the Lord's anointed? And then he created a lamentation, a poem or a song of sorrow over the king and the loss of Israel. And so he sang his lamentation. And we jump into chapter 2, verse 1. After this, David inquired of the Lord, shall I go up into any of the cities of Judah? And the Lord said to him, go up. To which shall I go up? And he said, to Hebron. So David went up there, and his two wives also, Ahinoam of Jezreel, and Abigail the widow of Nabal of Carmel. And David brought up his men who were with him, everyone with his household, and they lived in the towns of Hebron. And the men of Judah came, and there they anointed David king over the house of Judah. When they told David it was the men of Jabesh Gilead who buried Saul, David sent messengers to the men of Jabesh Gilead and said to them, may you be blessed by the Lord, because you showed this loyalty to Saul your Lord and buried him. Now may the Lord show steadfast love and faithfulness to you, and I will do good to you, because you have done this thing. Now therefore let your hands be strong and be valiant, for Saul your Lord is dead, and the house of Judah has anointed me king over them. This is an interesting phase in David's life. He was anointed to be king by Samuel 20 years ago, 17 years ago. And he has gone on a very long journey of suffering and sorrow and fighting different battles and fleeing for his life. And then the king of Israel gets killed. His enemy is now gone, the man who is hunting his life for the past 17 years. And now he doesn't know what to do. And just like we all ought to do, David does the best possible thing. And he says, Lord, what do I do? He knows the situation. He knows that there's possibilities for him to move to the left or to the right. But he takes a beat, he takes a step, and he says, Lord, what now? Verse 1, he inquired, should I go up, is what he says. And the Lord says, go. And then he's like, okay, that's great, but where do I go? And then he says, Hebron or Hebron. And so he travels up into Hebron. And then it says in verse 2, David went up there and his two wives also. Now, if we've been paying attention through 1 Samuel, we've seen where Abigail shows up, but we don't see where Ahinoam shows up. We don't know when he marries her. She kind of is just in the scene when Abigail shows up. So she's the first wife, Abigail's the second wife. And then they get mentioned every time he moves. Every time he moves from this place to that place, or when they got kidnapped and he had to go rescue them, the Bible has mentioned his two wives. And here it's mentioning it again. And what we're going to find out is that David has a problem with women in his life. David will acquire lots of concubines and more wives, and this is going to be his weak point. This is really going to be the place where he struggles. He did pretty well in the wilderness. He didn't have any children while he was in the wilderness. He didn't gather too many wives and concubines when he was in the wilderness because he was suffering. He was cast out. He was really struggling with his life. But then when he meets prosperity and some kind of form of peace, he really indulges and loses his way in that sin. And to be fair, biblically, it's explicit. Kings are not to have lots of wives. It is a law in the Old Testament. So we'll get into that as we move forward. But that's why it's mentioned over and over and over again, is because this is David's thorn in the side. He's a man after God's own heart. He's going to be brilliant. He's walking into a very dangerous world of politics and war and battles. And this is going to be his greatest error and his greatest struggle. Verse 3, and David brought up his men who were with him, everyone with his household, and they lived in the towns of Hebron. What I love about this text as we move forward is there's a distinction between David and his men and then Saul's son's servants and Saul's son's kingdom. And it's always going to refer as Saul's son and his people, and then it's going to say David and David's men. There is a very different level of loyalty and a different level of respect and relationship. And David has walked that journey that has created these friendships, that has created this empire of people who follow him. How many men did David have? He had 600 men. And he's had those men for roughly 15 years. So they all came out to him when they were in 1 Samuel. Before he fled, they all came out to him, and then he wandered around with them, and they bled together, and they sweat together, and they worked together, and they raised their families together. And David has been leader over these men for over a decade. And now he is finally coming back home, and he's coming with great possessions, a great army, and a kingdom in and of itself. When he gets to Hebron, he inhabits all of Hebron. When they camp, it's a city next to a city. We're talking 1,300 to 1,500 people following David. And when he comes up, it's a whole entourage. And we're going to find out that there's a hierarchy, there's systems. And David's already kind of a king among these people. Verse 4, and the men of Judah came, and there they anointed David king over the house of Judah. So what is happening at that point? Another word would be coronation. He is being crowned king. Now, this ceremony has ever been done once before in Israel. It was done for the king previous, which is King Saul, and all of Israel came out and he was anointed. Now, Saul was anointed twice, once in secret with Samuel, and then once in public with Israel. And Israel actually instigated it, and Samuel showed them how to do this. They're like, this is what you do for kings. You pour oil on their head and anoint them. And the oil is a representation of God's authority and God's blessing on them, that the Spirit of God would lead them and guide them. So anointing is literally pouring oil on somebody. So when you get into the New Testament and it talks about, somebody's sick, pour oil on them, anoint them so that they could be healed. The whole idea is that God is going to be pouring blessings on them. Judah, as a tribe, how many tribes are there? There's 12. 12 tribes of Israel. Judah is one. David is a part of that tribe. And they come to him very quickly and they're like, hey, we're so glad you're home, Mr. King. And they call him to be the king of their tribe. This doesn't make him king over all of Israel. This makes him king over Judah. So David has finally arrived to the position that God told him he would be in, and it only took 2 decades. First, Samuel caught him when he was just tending sheep, and he anointed him in secret, just like Saul. And now it is a public proclamation. He went from David is now king, took 2 decades to get there, and this is what his whole purpose in life has been. It feels like this should be a day of rejoicing. It feels like this is the time to say, yes, I finally got here. But what we're going to see with David is he doesn't do that. He kind of rolls with it. And he just kind of goes step by step. He doesn't push himself into it. He doesn't say, people, you need to obey me. He allows people to lift him up into the position that God has called. He doesn't thrust himself forward. But he is very concerned with other people. So his first response is to reach out to Jabesh Gilead. So it says in verse 4, part B, when they told David it was the men of Jabesh Gilead who buried Saul, David sent messengers to the men of Jabesh Gilead and said to them, may you be blessed by the Lord, because you showed this loyalty to Saul, your Lord, and you buried him. And this is going all the way back to 1 Samuel chapter 30, 31, where Jabesh Gilead, this town, took the body of the king that was disgraced and hung on a wall. They took it down and they gave him a proper burial. And David loved the king. As much as he was his enemy, he loved him. And so his first act as king is to acknowledge the righteousness of these people who honored the previous king. He reaches out to them and he says, may the Lord bless you. And then he says in verse 6, now may the Lord show steadfast love and faithfulness to you, and I will do good to you because you have done this thing. Proper leadership is to recognize the good that people do. Not only is it to punish evil, but it is also to promote righteousness. And so David, in the last chapter, killed a man for killing the king. And now he is blessing the people who buried the king, who risked their lives. And he says, I will take care of you. I will bless you. And to me, it doesn't say it, but to me it means that he's going to give them tax exemption, or he's going to give them an easier burden. He is going to take care of this group of people because they have shown themselves to be righteous, to be good, and to be a good part of society. And now his first act is not to punish evil, but to instill righteousness. And then he says this, verse 7, now therefore let your hands be strong and be valiant, for Saul your Lord is dead. And the house of Judah has anointed me king over them. He's not telling them that he is king over Israel. He's not telling them that he has a right to be king. What he's saying is, you guys, as the righteous people of Israel, you need to be strong and courageous because there are difficult times ahead. The king is gone, and now Judah has selected me to be the king. And I don't want problems with you guys. I want you to be prepared for the battles ahead. David sees that there is going to be a lot of problems. He is entering into a sphere of politics where he is either liked or disliked. He is the good guy or he is the bad guy. He's on their side or he's on the other people's side. And we're going to find out really quickly that there is a division among Israel. Verse 8. So Judah did that, but, verse 8, Abner, the son of Ner, commander of Saul's army, took Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, and brought him over to Mahanaim. And he made him king over Gilead, and the Asherites, and Jezreel, and Ephraim, and Benjamin, and all Israel. Ishbosheth, Saul's son, was 40 years old when he began to reign over Israel, and he reigned 2 years. But the house of Judah followed David. And the time that David was king in Hebron over the house of Judah was 7 years and 6 months. So who is Abner? Abner is the chief of the secret service. So Saul, the king, was the president, and the president always has the secret service to protect them. Well, Abner was the guy. Abner is the chief and commander of the army. He is just below the king. So the king gets killed in battle. Abner takes control over Israel. Abner is actually the true king. He is going to take Saul's son and make him the king, but Abner's pulling the strings. So in politics, this actually happens quite a bit. There's the people who have the power, and then there's the people who, are the face of the power. And so Ishbosheth, is Saul's son, rightful heir to the throne. And so Abner takes it upon himself. He chooses to take Ishbosheth, one of the last surviving members in the family. There's actually another son, but he's got problems. He's actually a child at this point. And he anoints him king over all of Israel. How many tribes are there? 12. David's got Judah. So how many tribes does Abner have? 11. So we're talking 11 to 1 odds. Okay? So that's Abner. Now Ishbosheth in verse 8, the son of Saul. And verse 9, and he made him king over Gilead. Yep. Verse 10, Ishbosheth, Saul's son, was 40 years old when he began to reign over Israel. And he reigned 2 years. So the numbers here are interesting because Abner and David become king at the same time. Who lasts longer? David lasts 7.5 years, and he's going to reign in Hebron. That's going to be the connection. David in Hebron is going to be his reign. Now, how long did Abner last? 2 years. What we're going to read in chapter 3 is 2 years. What we're going to find in chapter 4 is 7 years. So there's going to be a lot of struggle between the north and the south. The north is the 11, and the south is Judah, the 1 with David. So David's down in the south, reigning over them, and then Abner's up here with Ishbosheth. Now, what we find out later on is that David is anointed king at 30 years old. Saul's son is anointed at 40 years old. So there is a 10-year gap there. What this says about David is that he's been ruling over all of his men from his late teens. He was 18, 19 years old running an army. And then he went on the run as in his 20s. And these guys came out and followed him as a young man. And now he has grown into leadership in a very unique and dynamic way. Verse 12. Can you guys guess what's about to happen? Civil war. It's all bad. You can't have 2 kings in one kingdom, right? Verse 12, Abner, the son of Ner, and the servants of Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, went out from Mahanaim to Gibeon. And Joab, the son of Zeruiah, the servants of David, went out and met them at the pool of Gibeon. And they sat down, and the one on the one side of the pool, and the other on the other side of the pool. So what's interesting is that there's no kings allowed. There is a delegation to, it's almost like having a conference. Like, hey guys, let's get together and have a conversation. Can we just talk? And so they all show up at this pool. You guys sit on that side, and we sit on this side, and your people over there, my people over here. But there's no kings here. I'm curious. I don't know. There's no biblical information on this that I know of that says David wanted to be a part of this. This is what I mean by David just sits back and he just kind of lets things roll. However it plays out is however it plays out. He's very much trusting in what God's going to do. And so they have a delegation. They go in, they sit down at this pool. They each journey, they marched roughly about 20 miles up into the mountains. Gibeon is known for being a high city with worship. They have a special temple there eventually in the future. And this is the place to be. The northerners came down to the south and the southerners went up to the north, and they met in the middle at Benjamin. And they sit down at the pool to have conversation. And this is what they say. Verse 14, and Abner said to Joab, let the young men arise and compete before us. And Joab said, let them arise. Then those arose and passed over by number, 12 of Benjamin, and Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, and 12 of the servants of David. And each caught his opponent by the head and thrust his sword into his opponent's side. So they fell down together. Therefore the place was called Helkath Hazarim, which is at Gibeon. And the battle was very fierce that day. It couldn't be decided who won. So this delegation, they sit down and they have a conversation. And the conversation generally goes like this. Hey, will you guys concede and let David be the king? And they're like, no. Will you concede and let Ishbosheth be the king? And they're like, yeah, definitely not. And they're like, great. You give 12 men, we'll give 12 men, and let them fight to the death. Last man standing wins. Right? At least not everybody has to die. Ishbosheth has the Benjamites. The Benjamites are some gnarly dudes. It says that these guys can throw a sling and hit a hare at like 50 yards. They can kill a rabbit while it's running from here to the other side of the church. These dudes are scary. When you get into Judges, if you go back in history about 75 years, maybe 100 years, what you find is that the 11 tribes of Israel came against them because they did some wicked, terrible stuff, like Sodom and Gomorrah stuff. They did some terrible stuff. And the 11 tribes attacked them, and the Benjamites fought them all off and didn't even get a scratch. And they just decimated Israel. The Benjamites are gnarly. So Ishbosheth sent his best guys. Abner knew what he was doing. And here's David's guys. And they go marching up there, and they put their 12 guys in. And you know what? Equal. The best in Israel is matched by the best in Israel. And it doesn't decide the contest. And so what do you do after that? All out war. They nicknamed the place because those 24 people died. So they nicknamed the place Helkath Hazarim, which is the place of the edged sword, because they struck each other. Verse 17, the battle was very fierce that day, and Abner and the men of Israel were beaten before the servants of David. So there is a clear victor that Abner lost, David won. David's men are stronger, they're faster, they're better, they're fiercer, and they pursue Abner, and they crush him. So this is the fierceness of David's men. When we talked about how he went out and at 20 years old, people just came to him, over the next 2 decades, this army has been sharpened into the spear of the Lord. They are a dynamic fighting force that can't be rivaled. His inner circle is going to tell us there's 13 warriors out of the 600. There's 13 of them that individually have killed thousands of people. So what we're finding out now is that David's been gone. David has been struggling. David has been running his life as best he can in the wilderness. But what God has been doing has been creating every scenario that he needs to be king in the future. God has molded and fashioned everybody and everything around David for his purpose. And we're going to see it pan out. God's will is going to just overflow on Israel. Now, there's 2 wills here. You got Abner and you got God. And we're going to find out later that Abner knows better. Abner knows what he's doing. But that's the fierceness of the battle. This is pretty gnarly stuff. Brother against brother, civil war among Israel, and Abner's losing. So verse 18, and the 3 sons of Zeruiah were there, Joab, Abishai, and Asahel. The 3 sons of Zeruiah. Have we ever heard of a son of Zeruiah before? Joab. We've heard of Joab before. Joab is the commander of the army. He's equal to Abner. He's the right-hand man to David. He is the leader of the secret service. And they're all brothers. And we're going to find out about Asahel is as swift as a gazelle. But we also know about Abishai. We've read of Abishai before. Do you remember the second time Saul came out to attack David, to kill him, and David did not kill him? Do you remember when we were introduced to Abner? That Saul was sleeping, Abner was sleeping next to him. David could have speared him and decided not to do it. And he went up on the mountain and he's like, "What's up, dog? Why are you chasing me?" Who went with David? Abishai. David said, "Saul has come out against me. I'm going to go up to the camp of Saul. Who will go with me?" And Abishai says, "I'll go with you." Abishai is the man who went with David and told David, "Your enemy is before you, kill him." And David's like, "No, I can't kill the Lord's anointed." That's where they have that whole conversation. So these are the three inner circle to David, and they are brothers, and they are there in the battle. And this is going to be a big plot shift. You know, like daytime dramas? This is a daytime drama. We're being introduced to the three brothers, and some crazy stuff's about to happen. So watch out. So it says, now Asahel was as swift of foot as a wild gazelle. Verse 19, and Asahel pursued Abner, and as he went, he turned neither to the right hand nor to the left from following Abner. Then Abner looked behind him and said, is it you, Asahel? And he answered, it is I. Abner said to him, turn aside to your right or to your left, and seize one of the young men and take his spoil. But Asahel would not turn aside from following him. And Abner said again to Asahel, turn aside from following me. Why should I strike you to the ground? How then could I lift up my face to your brother Joab? But he refused to turn aside. Therefore Abner struck him in the stomach with the butt of his spear, so that the spear came out of his back, and he fell there and died where he was. And all who came to the place where Asahel had fallen and died stood still. So this is a pretty gnarly scene. Abner, losing the battle, retreats. All the people retreat. They're running for their lives. They're absolutely defeated. But Joab and his men are pursuing them. They're like, we're gonna end this today. There is not going to be another civil war. We will have a king in Israel, and his name is going to be David. And they are chasing after these guys. Now, it doesn't tell us, but Abner has to be on something fast. Either a donkey or a chariot or something. He's got to be in an environment where he can outpace everybody else. That's why Asahel is so fast. He can run and keep up with him. Now, I'm a runner. Running fast is hard. You run out of breath really quickly. For Asahel to catch up to this guy, stick with him, have a whole conversation, this dude is fast. He is wicked fast. And so he's running, and Abner says what? Warning number one, dude, you need to stop. Take that dude. He's got some coin on him. Go get some money. But Asahel's not there for the money. He's there for David. His loyalty for what he believes to be the true king. And so he says, turn aside. He's like, nope, I won't do it. And then he gives him what? Warning number two. He's like, dude, if I hurt you, how am I supposed to look your brother in the face? What is he saying? I have to have a relationship with your brother because we're both commanding officers and we're going to have to talk. And if I hurt you, I really don't want to, he's going to be upset. Like, come on, man, just stop. Can you just stop? Right? Imagine that's the conversation. And he wouldn't stop. And he's like, fine. You know what? I'll hit you with what? The back of my spear. It's not even the pointy end. I'm just going to I'll just, knock some air out of you, right? And so he hits him, and what happens? It goes through him. The spear goes in his stomach and out of his back. Now, I don't know what happened. Maybe if he's in a chariot, the dude's like, oh, there's a bump coming. Whoa. And he's like trying to slow down, and Asahel ran into it. Who knows what happened? It doesn't explain it. But what we know is that it was shocking. Whatever took place was so abnormal. Everybody stopped and looked at it. It says that as everybody was pursuing them and running after them, they stopped and looked. And they stood still. And they were looking at Asahel dead on the ground. And they're like, what happened to that guy? Like, that's not sword. That's not a spear. What happened? It's like his guts are coming out the wrong way. This isn't a normal way to die. Now, this is going to cause a lot of problems in the future. This is a very important event as we move forward with Joab and Abishai and David and Abner. There is some drama to behold in chapter 3. Verse 24. But Joab and Abishai pursued Abner, and as the sun was going down, they came to the hill of Ammah, which lies before Giah, on the way to the wilderness of Gibeon. And the people of Benjamin gathered themselves together behind Abner and became one group and took their stand on the top of the hill. Then Abner called to Joab, "Shall the sword devour forever? Do you not know that the end will be bitter? How long will it be before you tell your people to turn from pursuit of their brothers?" And Joab said, "As God lives, if you had not spoken, surely the men would not have given up the pursuit of their brothers until the morning." So Joab blew the trumpet, and all the men stopped and pursued Israel no more, nor did they fight any more. This scene, verse 24 through 25, it says that everybody ran. Abner ran up on the hill, and then this is what you'd find. Anybody seen, I know you guys haven't, we've had this conversation, the newest Tarzan? Anybody seen that? There's a scene at the very end. Tarzan swoops in, saves the girl. I think we got that point. But at the very, very end, there's two armies. There's one out in the ocean, and then there's one on the mountain. And everybody lines up, and they're all chanting and screaming, and they're looking at this hill, and there's just thousands of people. And they're like, we were going to run into that? And that's what's happening with Abner. It's just like a movie. I feel like they got this out of the Bible and they put it into the movies because this is such a heroic scene. Abner runs up the hill. He gets to the top and it says all of Benjamin is there. An entire tribe of people stand up and they're like, nah, we're done. This isn't happening anymore. You guys need to go back. And so Abner gets reinforcements. All of his men get safety and protection. And here comes Joab, and they're not stopping. So Abner speaks up and he says, what? How long are you going to keep this up? Don't you know that this is going to be hard? That this is going to be bitter? If you keep this up, we are going to kill each other, brother against brother. Joab turns around and he says, I appreciate you saying that. We'll stop. And he blows the horn. So he turns around and the two armies split. Okay, they go home. Why did Joab take that as a sign that he should stop? For Abner to turn around, one, he showed wisdom in saying, hey, this is just not going to happen anymore. If you keep this up, it's disaster. And two, it's brother against brother. He's practically admitting defeat. He's saying, we've reached the end. We're not fighting anymore. I give up. Can we stop? And Joab's like, all right, you're right. Like I was caught up in the moment, but you're right. We can end this. It's pretty much a call to surrender. Now, verses 29, Abner and his men went all that night through the Arabah. They crossed the Jordan and marched the whole morning, and they came to Mahanaim. So Abner turned around, he left Benjamin, and he marched all night, another 20 miles home, and he carried his men with him, wounded and otherwise battered. Verse 30, Joab turned for pursuing Abner, and when he had gathered all the people together, there were missing from David's servants 19 men, beside Asahel. But the servants of David had struck down of Benjamin 360 of Abner's men. And they took up Asahel and buried him in the tomb of his father, which is at Bethlehem. And Joab and his men marched all night, and the day broke upon them at Hebron. This is an epic scene. Nobody wins. There's no celebration of like, yeah, we did it. We killed 360 of them, and they only killed 19 of us. No. Everybody loses in a civil war. Nobody wins. When a house is divided, it is an absolute total loss. It's just like when a husband fights with his wife. The kids don't win, the husband doesn't win, and the wife doesn't win. Nobody in the house wins. The idea of them marching home is almost as if they've both been defeated. But then we get the score. And we look at who's better. David or Abner? Who's better? David. David's men are better in battle. 19 to 360. That's a pretty good score. Okay, application. Let's turn to Hebrews chapter 11. As we've studied As we've studied David, I've become more and more fond, not with him as a person, but with the process that God takes him through. Hebrews 11:32. And what more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel, and of the prophets. Hebrews 11 is the Hall of Fame of faith. It talks about people who had faith in God. And this is what it says, verse 33. These people who, through faith, conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, and put foreign armies to flight. What this is saying is that what made David great was his faith in God. He started out as a shepherd who killed Goliath, who became a general in the king's army, and quickly became an outcast to his entire society. And he rode this wave up and down, left and right, and he was so weakened and bludgeoned and pushed into a corner that he fled to their greatest enemy and lived there for a year and a half or 2 years, I think it was a year and a half, only to return a mighty man of valor, to be strong and to put armies to flight. God's training process for David has been magnificent. And the tool that has sustained David is his faith. It says that by faith he became strong in his weakness. By faith he put armies to flight. By faith he has now culminated in becoming king of Judah. It was very small beginnings when God called David. And it took, I imagine for him, eons and decades to get to where he's gotten to be crowned king of Judah. But what sustained him is faith. He trusted in the Lord. He believed in what God had promised. And though he made lots of mistakes along the way, and he really suffered and cried, he lost his best friend, he lost his mentor, he lost his parents, and he was surrounded by people who eventually tried to kill him. He grew into the full measure and stature of man that he is supposed to be by faith. And that journey has kind of restarted at this point. We're going to forget about David's wanderings as we move forward, because he's going to have so many battles and struggles in front of him that what was behind him seems small and insignificant. His whole family got kidnapped, and you're like, it's not that bad. His son's going to try to kill him. It just gets worse. But by faith, he is going to rule over the kingdom in such a wonderful manner. He is not going to play politics. He is not going to push himself forward. God will do all of the work. And that's what he's trusting in. That in God's time, God's will be done. Now, here's a question for you. Why did Abner make Ishbosheth king? I think it's customs and traditions. It's the thing that you must do. Abner is going to walk in the path of hierarchy, that the king has an heir, the heir is to be the king, and then the king has an heir, and then the heir is to be king. It's the prince to king to prince to king. This is just what we do. They've only had one king. So this is a very new tradition. But what we know is that Samuel instituted these traditions. God used the prophet to tell the people that these are the rules and the customs for a monarchy. You guys asked for a king, I'm giving you a king, and this is how kings are to rule. What's interesting is that God has made it very, very clear that Saul and his family are to not rule. He specifically says, I have gotten rid of you, I am ripping the kingdom from you, and your sons will not sit on the throne. And Abner knows this. So Abner has a choice. Follow the will of God or follow our customs and traditions and our must-do next steps. And he made the choice to follow his own will, not God's will. As we move forward, every time somebody comes to David to discuss him ruling over Israel, this is the number one thing they say. I know that God will make you king over Israel. Every time, and Abner's going to do this in the next chapter. So he chose his will over God's will. And this is the story of the two wills. David just wants God's will to be done. Now, David's men want David to be king. They're not necessarily there for God's will. David is there for God's will. Abner is there for his own will. In Ephesians chapter 5, verse 15, it tells us that we are to not be foolish, but we are to be wise and to know God's will, to fellowship with one another, encourage one another with songs and hymns and spiritual songs, and to be filled with the Spirit, because the days are evil. There's always two wills. There's God's will, and then there's everybody else's will. It's my will, it's my wife's will, it's my kids' will, it's my job's will. But the question is, do we know God's will? And are we determined to do it? That's Abner's problem. He knows it, but he does not do it. David, on the other hand, knows it and is determined to do it. And more with David, it's like allow God to do it for him. So come back next week for 2 Samuel chapter 3, bloodbath. It is the path of blood.